everyone. Grandpa Ron here again. Hope you're all having a great day. Today we're going to get back into our very basic Bible study. Remember, we're looking at the book of Joshua. And last week we saw that as they were taking over the promised land, that the Gibeonites kind of tricked them into thinking that they were from a far-off land by wearing old clothes and deceiving them. And Joshua made a covenant with them that they wouldn't destroy them. Found out later that they were being deceptive, that they were really residents of the land that they were supposed to get rid of. But since he had made this covenant with them, this oath, he stuck with it. But he did make them slaves and woodcutters and water bearers for the children of Israel and for the tabernacle. Now we're going to see what happens in chapter 10 as the conquest or driving out of people from the promised land continues. So let's take a look at that. Verse 1. Now it came about when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were within their land, that he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all of its men were mighty. So when this king of Jerusalem found out that Gibeon had entered into an agreement with the children of Israel, and that the children of Israel had destroyed these other cities, he was pretty nervous and upset. And so let's see what he does. Verse 3, Therefore Adonizedek of Jerusalem sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, and to Piram, king of Jarmuth, and to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel. So their only reaction was to fight, to try to destroy the children of Israel. You know, the Gibeonites were a little bit smarter. They saw that it was futile, that God was on the side of Israel. And so even though they were deceptive, they were able to make peace with them. Verse 5, So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered together and went up, they with all their armies encamped at Gibeon and fought against it. So the first thing they do is they're going to teach Gibeon a lesson for making peace and destroy it. And not only teach them a lesson, but by taking this city, it would give them a buffer between them and the armies of the children of Israel. Verse 6, Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua to the camp of Gilgal, saying, Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites that live in the hill country have assembled against us. So they're saying, we've got an agreement here. We're your servants, we're your slaves. Come help us. Verse 7, So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the valiant warriors. So he takes the whole army up, and he's going to stand by his covenant with the Gibeonites. Verse 8, And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not one of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal. That was quite a distance. Normally this would have taken several days. So I know it's quite a surprise to these armies camped there. Verse 10, And the Lord confounded them before Israel, and he slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, and pursued them by the way of the ascent to Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Ezekah and Makkedah. So there's a tremendous victory here. The army's in flight. They're in disarray, and the children of Israel are pursuing them. Verse 11. And it came about as they fled from before Israel, while they were at the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord threw large stones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died from the hailstones than those whom the sons of Israel killed with the sword. It's amazing that the Lord rained down these hailstones, and I don't know if you've ever seen hailstones large enough to do tremendous damage and even cause death, but I haven't seen the actual storm, but I've seen the result of it once in New Mexico, where cattle had been killed. But here, none of the Israelites are affected, and just like what I saw in New Mexico, you can have hail that is very heavy on one side of a street, and on the other side of the street, nothing. It's miraculous what God can do. But in this hailstorm in New Mexico, cattle had been killed, cars were just totally destroyed, and that's what's happened here. But the hail was selective in that it did not affect the children of Israel. Verse 12, Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon in the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves for of their enemies. Is it not written in the book of Jashar? And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not haste to go down for about a whole day. So this is a tremendous miracle of the Lord, but there's been a lot of discussion and disagreement on what actually happened here. Did the sun actually stop? Did the moon actually stop? Well, some of the interpretations say no, God slowed the rotation of the earth down a little bit, or God tilted the earth on its axis, or God did none of those things. He just used refraction of sunlight in the morning and evening to make it seem like the day was longer, but he kept it lighter so that they could fight longer. Some have alluded to the hailstorm, that it surely darkened the sky, and not only did it kill these Amorites, but it also provided shade for the children of Israel, and that this darkness, kind of twilight type light, lasted way into the evening. And yet others say this poem that's quoted here should not be taken literally. You know, it's a poem and it's using figures of speech. But the one thing we do know is that something very unusual and tremendous happened. The children of Israel were able to defeat and utterly destroy these armies. So regardless of how you interpret it, the one thing we do know is something great happened that day. Verse 14, And there was no day like that before it or after it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp to Gilgal. Verse 16. Now these 5 kings had fled and hidden themselves in the cave at Makkedah. And it was told to Joshua, saying, These 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, Roll large stones against the mouth of the cave, and assign men by it to guard them, but do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them in the rear. Do not allow them to enter their cities, for the Lord your God has delivered them into your hand. So Joshua tactically is saying, don't let this slow you down. We're not going to mess with them right now. just bottle them up in the cave. We're going to go ahead and wipe the rest of their armies out, and then we'll come back and deal with them later. Verse 20. And it came about when Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished slaying them with a very great slaughter until they were destroyed, and the survivors who remained of them had entered the fortified cities, that all the people returned to the camp to Joshua at Makkedah in peace. No one uttered a word against any of the sons of Israel. They couldn't, because they've been wiped out. And any survivors were terrified. Verse 22. Then Joshua said, Open the mouth of the cave and bring these 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so and brought the 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. And it came about when they brought the kings out to Joshua, that Joshua called for all the men of Israel, and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, Come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. So they came near and put their feet on their necks. This wasn't a sign of boasting. It was a symbol of complete and total submission of these kings. Joshua then said to them, Do not fear or be dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies with whom you fight. So afterward Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hanged them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. Again, this was a common practice at that time. Then it came about at sunset that Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves, and put large stones over the mouth of the cave to this very day. That is, until the day of the writing of this. Now Joshua captured Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed it and every person who was in it. He left no survivor. Thus he did to the king of Makkedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. And we're going to read this over and over again here now, how he destroys these cities. Keep in mind that God had given these cities a lot of time to repent and turn from idolatry. And I'm going to put a reference in the video here to Genesis chapter 15, verses 14 through 16. And I'm just going to read that to you. We studied this a long time ago, remember? This is when God told to Abraham what was going to happen in the future. Then his name was Abram. And God said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. Remember, that was Egypt. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and after they will come out with many possessions. So they're going to be captives in Egypt, but God's going to judge Egypt. The children of Israel are going to leave, and they're going to have a lot of possessions. Remember, that all has happened. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they'll return here, meaning the promised land, the land that God had promised to Abraham. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. One of the reasons the children were delayed, I mean, all these things are interwoven and work together. But the children of Israel had spent 400 years, 430 actually, in Egypt. And then when they came out, they spent another 40 years wandering in the desert because they were unfaithful to the Lord. So these Amorites were full of iniquity. They were idol worships. They, as we mentioned before repeatedly, they engaged in child sacrifice. And the Lord gave them hundreds of years to change their ways, because it's clear that they have heard about the children of Israel, about their God. because we saw other cases where people did turn to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob after hearing about it, but not these people. So now, what God said back then, He's doing now. He's holding them accountable. They've gotten to the point where they're not going to change, and they're being wiped out. So let's see the rest of these kings. Verse 29, Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave it also with its king into the hands of Israel, and he struck it and every person who was in it with the edge of the sword. He left no survivor in it. Thus he did to its kings just as he had done to the king of Jericho, just as God had commanded him. Verse 31, And Joshua and all Israel went with him, passed on from Libnah to Lachish, and they camped by it and fought against it. And the Lord gave Lachish into the hands of Israel, and he captured it on the second day and struck it and every person who was in it with the edge of the sword, according to all that he had done to Libnah. So he's taking these cities one at a time. Remember, their strength had been depleted because the armies had been utterly decimated by the hailstorms and the children of Israel chasing them as they retreated to these cities. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua defeated him and his people until he had left him no survivor. And Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Lachish to Eglon, and they camped by it and fought against it, and they captured it on that day and struck it with the edge of the sword. And he utterly destroyed it that day, every person who was in it, according all that he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel went with him up from Eglon to Hebron, and they fought against it. And they captured it and struck it and its king and all its cities with the person who were in it with the edge of the sword. He left no survivor, according to all that he had done to Eglon, and he utterly destroyed it and every person who was in it. It just goes on and on, these victories. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to Debir, and they fought against it. And he captured it and its king and all its cities, and they struck them with the edge of the sword and utterly destroyed every person who was in it. He left no survivor, just as he had done to Hebron. So he did to Debir and its king, as he had also done to Libnah and its king. Verse 40, Thus Joshua struck all the land, the hill country, and the Negev, and the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left no survivor, but he utterly destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. So Joshua was true to the Lord, and just as the Lord had promised Joshua, if you're true to me and follow my instructions, I will give you victory. Verse 41, And Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea, even as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, even as far as Gibeon. And Joshua captured all these kings and their lands at one time, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Again, God was true to his word, and Joshua and the children of Israel were true to their word during this portion of the conquest. 43. So Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. So this is a major part of the taking of the promised land. Not all of it yet, but this is a big chunk of it. Mainly the Amorites, all these different tribes of the Amorites. So just as God had promised hundreds of years before, he has now rendered judgment for the iniquities of the people that are inhabiting the promised land, and has driven them out of this section. Well, I hope this has been meaningful for you. We're going to stop here, and I hope you'll watch the next one. But we're going to see how this conquest of the promised land continues, and if it continues to run as smoothly as it has in this chapter. In the meantime, God bless. Bye-bye.